What is the creepiest thing that has ever happened in your house at night while you were alone? Someone walked past my window, which isn't that weird except I'm on the 8th freaking floor. I almost had a cardiac. Apparently, there were renovations being done on the building, and they were building the scaffolding up to my level. Happened to me at work, on the 10th floor. I saw the guy walking outside of the window behind me through the mirror on my desk. I nearly died. There's a state prison less than a mile away from my house. When I was 18, my family was out of town. My dad called the house saying someone had escaped from the prison. Lock all the doors and have something handy to protect myself with. I did. It was at night and I turned on the police scanner. He was incarcerated for violating over a dozen teenage girls. I looked out the window in the back door just in time to see a man in an orange jumpsuit jogging through my backyard. Stop, see me and start walking towards my back door. Next thing I knew, police ran into view and tackled him. One of the most terrifying moments of my life. My dad just reminded me I was 16 when that happened though, not 18. My bad. Yes, I am a girl. This was when we still had a landline at my house. Ours was the very last one on the line, so it sometimes did funny things like ring for no reason or just drop a call in the middle. One night I was home alone and it started to storm really bad and the phone rings. I pick up and it's the woman from 911 asking why I called me. I didn't call 911. 911. I just received a call from this number. Are you home alone? Me. Yes. No one could have made that call. 911. Are you sure you are okay? Would you like me to send a car? To me. In my head I'm thinking, God yes, come save me. I don't think so. I really did not call 911. Okay mom. Well, have a good night. I sat on my couch with my dog and did not move till my parents came home. It freaked me the frick out. TLDR, on a dark stormy night my phone called 911 by itself. They wouldn't have sent a car out anyway. 1. I live at the end of a very long private drive, so they very well could have sent one by and I wouldn't have known it. 2. This was only the first time it happened and the second time they did send someone. We've traced the call. It's coming from inside your house. When I was about 8, my bedroom was full of windows with no blinds. One night I heard something outside but was too scared to go to the window and see. The next day I go outside and there are footprints in the snow around my windows. For the next week or so I would refuse to sleep in that room. So every morning when my mother got up she would find me asleep under the living room table. One night as I was under the table I heard someone at the back door. They were jiggling the doorknob to try to get in. Ran into my mother's room screaming. She called the police. Sure enough, the same shoe prints were at the back door. The police said there had been a bunch of break-ins in the area. TLDR, someone was stalking my house when I was 8. This is when building a zombie-protected home pays off. When I was a young lad, staying with cousins in the Dalles, Oregon, quasi-rural area, huge yard, nearest house maybe a quarter mile. The 5 of us kids were out playing after dark. The idea was one person would go hide, the other 4 would count and then come find the hidden person, who would then try to run back to base without being tagged. My oldest cousin, perhaps 12, hides, the rest of us set out in different directions. As per usual, someone yells, I see him, and we all come running and give chase. The chase does not go in the direction of the base, however, but toward a bunch of trees. The 4 of us more or less had the trees surrounded when my cousin comes out from another direction. Once he appears, the person cornered in the trees heads toward the road. We found out the next day that the neighbors had someone break into their house. TLDR, me and 3 other 8-10-year-olds cornered someone who was probably a bugler, thinking he was it in a game of tag. He would have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for you meddling kids. I wasn't alone. Me and my wife were at one of her friend's house. It was about 10 at night when the doorbell rings. We all stop talking and stare at each other. I ask if anyone has ever come over this late or if she was expecting someone. She said no. So I go to the front of the house and look out a window and don't see anyone. So I open the door and there is a mutilated dead squirrel right on the welcome mat. We turned on the floodlights on the house and looked around but didn't see or hear anyone. It freaked us all the frick out. We never found out who did it or why, but just assumed it was some butthole kids. I did it. Many years ago, I lived in a big, old, 3-story house that had a room on the middle level that we converted into an office. I used to write financial reports late at night that were published early the next morning. The office had a few computers and my toddler son had been playing on one of them for most of the evening, right up until I finished my work at around 9 PM. By then he had fallen asleep, so I switched off his monitor, scooped him up and took him to bed, flicking off the light as I left. For the next couple of hours I relaxed in another room watching TV with my wife. She went to bed around 11 PM, and at midnight I decided to do the same. I realized I'd left a window open in the office, so I went in there to close it. The house was silent, and the room was pitch black dark and ice cold when I walked in. Colder than it should have been for the time of the year, even with the window open. I paused for a moment in the center of the room to think about this, and then it happened. Knock knock knock. Something was tapping on the glass, but it wasn't the random tappings of a bird or another kind of animal. It was completely uniform. It sounded human, but I was on the second floor, so how was that possible? It was so dark that I couldn't make anything out against the black glass, but a few moments later it happened again. Knock knock knock. By now I was already feeling on edge. Then, something happened that chilled me to the core, because out of the corner of the room, to my right, and from the darkness, a high-pitched, almost squeaky voice began to speak quite loudly. "I can see you." I froze on the spot. My blood went cold. My bowels prepared for evacuation. My god, I thought. I never wrote that book. Any book. It spoke again, but with greater emphasis on that all-important word. I can see you. I determined that I was almost certainly fricked, so I figured, what the heck. I turned slowly to my right and walked into the darkness, until I finally reached my son's computer. Nothing there but an empty chair. But no talking now. Just silence. A horrible silence. Carefully, I reached over and switched on the monitor. The screen brightened, and there it was. Something red and horrible. Once again it tapped on the glass. It was fricking Elmo from my kid's Sesame Street game. Of all the stories on the thread, this is the one that came the closest to making me fear crap everywhere. I went downstairs to get some water at about 2 AM. In the kitchen we've got a clock on the wall. As I walk into the room, acutely aware of every creak that echoes around the house surrounding me, I hear the fast wind of something mechanical. As I slowly glance to my left, subconsciously grabbing my glass a little tighter, I see the clock hands on the wall spinning at about 50 times normal speed, around, and around, and around. I think to myself, very clearly this is how movies start. This is it. I was ready to defend myself with my glass whilst dashing over to grab a knife. It was then I realized we had a radio clock which automatically sets itself. I'd never seen it do it before. It was now 1 AM. This happened to me at my old dorm. I was in the lounge studying all night, and around 2 AM I'll look at the clock only to see the hands moving forwards at an alarming rate. As I start to freak out, it dawned on me that it was daylight savings time. A plain white van would creep very slowly down our street at around 2 AM weekly during the summer I was 19. Our street was not a dead-end road, but had residential roads at either end preventing it from being a through street, so this van was clearly not making a route of any sort. I would hear it and watch from my upstairs bedroom window every time it passed by. One night my parents and my brother were out of town and I was home alone, happily sleeping when I heard a car door slam out front. I jumped up to look out the window and the van was backed into our driveway. I couldn't see anyone moving around outside but the lights were off and they were parked. I ran into the hall and crouched into a ball and tried to listen for any sounds and plan an attack escape route. I was shaking uncontrollably. A few minutes later I heard the engine start up and the van tore out of my driveway, and I never saw it again. I have heard of vans like that patrolling neighborhoods at night. I think they are looking for open garages or something else that would be an easy steal. I woke up in the middle of the night because my television turned on. I don't have cable so it's all static. Then it shuts off. I just lay there not sure what to think. Then it turns back on and back off. This keeps happening and I am about to crap myself. I start to get up to attempt to look around and I hear a thud nearby. I bravely run to the switch to turn the lights on and investigate. The remote was trapped between my mattress and the wall, and my moving around in my sleep was pressing the power button. When I got up, it released the remote and it fell on the ground, causing the thud. That's what it wanted you to think. It was pretty early in the morning and I heard some weird noise downstairs. My wife was out of town with her mom, so just me and the cats in the house. And they were both on the bed with me and also looked kinda freaked out. So I get up slowly and hear another loud crash, glass breaking type noise. I didn't own a gun or anything at the time, so I was looking around for some sort of weapon, which ended up being this brass vase thing I kept changing. I grabbed that and creeped downstairs, slightly freaking out. More noises, then a noise. Turns out I left the back door wide open and my goat wandered into the kitchen and crap everywhere and broke a shelf. I yelled at the goat and he went back outside. I hate it when my goat does that. When I was younger, maybe 13-14, my sister and I were home alone. We lived in a very rural area, on a dirt road, and the nearest neighbor was over a mile away. We were instructed to not open the door for anyone, no matter what, so we are just hanging out, playing video games, watching TV, etc. Well, the dogs start barking, and we hear the distinctive sound of a vehicle door closing. Next thing we know, someone is banging on the door. We go peek outside the windows and there's this guy we have never seen before out there. So we just sit in the corner, peering out the window, trying to be very quiet, hoping he would just go away. Then, out of nowhere, this freak tries to open our door, which is of course locked. Well, we really start to panic, and he could probably hear us crying and saying crap like, "Oh my god, what if he breaks in? Get the phone," etc. He is obviously getting more and more pissed off because just keeps shaking the door harder and trying to twist the lock doorknob. Then all of a sudden, he just stopped. He walked back to his truck, got in and left. We of course immediately called our parents, and all this led to my dad getting 2 German shepherds and a chain link fence. We still to this day have no freaking clue what he wanted, or why he tried to get in our house. We are just really thankful he didn't. Dude, almost the exact same thing happened to me in my apartment. Some guy I had never seen before starts pounding on my door at 11:30 at night. Fortunately I had both deadbolts locked because he tried opening the door too. He just stood there pounding on the door for half an hour before he finally gave up and left. Freaked the heck out of me. When I was 16, my parents worked at night, so my sister and I would be home alone often. Her bedroom was upstairs and she usually stayed up there, so I would be downstairs alone until my parents got home. One night, I heard these noises coming from the basement. It was like scratching and banging, like someone was walking through a sea of empty aluminum cans. I was too scared to go down there, and I didn't think it was enough of an emergency to call the cops. I thought maybe it was an animal or something. I called my sister down to make sure I wasn't going crazy, but the noise stopped before she got to hear it. She told me not to worry and went back to her room. Later that night while I was lying in bed, I heard a voice coming from the basement. It wasn't loud or anything, it was just a man talking. I thought I was hearing things, so I called my sister downstairs again to see if she heard it too, but again, it stopped. She went back to bed and so did I. The same thing happened the next night. I heard a man talking outside of my window while I was sleeping. That time, I was sure I was hallucinating or dreaming, but still completely freaked out. I didn't get much sleep that night until I was sure the voice had gone away. I believe about 2 weeks later, we went out of town for a few days and came back home to find that the basement door was open. There were no signs of a robbery. None of our stuff was missing and everything was just as we had left it. But my dad checked the basement door outside and found that the lock was broken. We filed a police report and finally went into the basement to see what was up. We found a moldy sleeping bag, a flashlight, and empty bottles. Someone had been living in our basement without us knowing. I wasn't crazy after all, and it's the second scariest thing I've ever come to realize. Home alone completely. No pets. No one has a key to the house but me. I bake a pizza and leave it alone to cool. I come back. No freaking pizza. I live in the woods in Canada, about 8 kilometers outside of the town of Bragg Creek. I've been a city boy all my life, so adapting to the difference of living in nature has been an adventure. The silence, the absolute inky blackness of moonless nights, The way the trees surrounding the house are turned a bright duotone of black and blue, casting impossibly long, mournful shadows on nights when the moon is out. But the beauty of daytime has made adapting relatively easy, and I was surprised at how quickly I was growing accustomed to my new surroundings. Then one night, a month into living there, I was awakened by something in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, and with that sense that it was a noise you can almost remember that woke you up. I was alone. My girlfriend had spent the night in town with friends and it was so dark I couldn't see my hand an inch in front of my face if I tried. I lay awake, hearing the breeze rustle the leaves faintly outside the open window, when a nearly indescribable lingering scream erupted in the night. I sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding like a beast trying to escape my chest. Again the scream cuts through the night, starting my mind racing. What the frick is it? Insane explanations fly into my mind. Is it a woman? A monster? An injured animal? A freaking alien? 4 or 5 more times the scream pierces the silence, slowly getting further from my home. I get up and close the window, and crazily go back to sleep. The next morning I email my neighbor about an acre away to see if they heard the same thing. He had. He knew what it was. Apparently it was the sound of a mother cougar calling her cubs, and that the call is famous for sounding like a woman in distress. I haven't heard it since. My sister had some friends over watching horror films, and I was out landing for most of the night. When I got back around 1 AM, all of the lights were off except for the television. I walked up to the back door, trying to open it silently to sneak up and yell boo to scare them. The little twits had locked the door. Front door is never open, so my only option to get in was my bedroom window, which I could climb up a tree to access. But I wanted some revenge. I went up to the front door, which is a massive oak thing with a big brass knocker on the inside. Yeah, don't understand that to this day. I slammed it a dozen times really fast, then bolted around the corner to my window, climbed inside, hearing them chattering and trying to look out the windows to see who was knocking. The door to my room was off kilter, so it swung open slowly if unlatched, and it creaked like mad. So I turned the knob to unlatch it and stand behind the door. Dead silence from the chatter squad. My sister was apparently the bravest of the bunch, cause she walked in and tried to flick on the light. The switch is beside the fully opened door, so when she reached for it I grabbed her. Such a scream, and the best part was that one of her friends bolted out the house and ran home in her pajamas before she had a chance to hear the relieved sigh. Fun times last decade. What amazing friends she has. Left her to die. I'm 12. My parents are out with my brother. It's around 7 o'clock at night. I go downstairs and pop Silent Hill in the PlayStation. An hour goes by and I'm nearly crapping my pants. I'm in the alternate school, and I walk into a room. As the camera angle changes I see the morbid scene before me. Dozens of blood-covered telephones. Now this is Silent Hill, and such blood-covered items is not out of the ordinary. But there was something extremely off-putting about so many telephones. I take a step forward. The telephones start ringing. My telephone starts ringing. Frick dude, I remember that scene perfectly. Silly middle school me would sit up late at night playing with headphones on. I was playing one night, creeping the frick out, wandering around bravely with my lead pipe, and a rough hand grabs my shoulder. I jumped about 10 feet in the air. Was just my dad telling me to get my butt to bed since I had school in the morning. I live with my father. We rent a house in a decent area. A few bad apples in the neighborhood. The garage isn't enclosed. Has a garage door that is a part of the fence and just a covering. Basically a carport. We have a bunch of crap stored outside under the carport along with either my truck or my father's vehicle. Fast forward, I am at home, in my room playing some Xbox, zoning out. The dog, border collie, Akita, mixes outside. My room has a window looking into the backyard. I can occasionally hear the dog play with something or run around. Come 3 AM absolutely everything is quiet. Not even the wind makes a noise outside. I go out the back door to let the dog in for the night and see the dog standing teeth bared and his tail curled all the way up. Akitas tend to do this when curious, happy, mad, scared. I tell him to come in. He starts growling. I shut the door, walk to my room and grab my Maglite and Winchester 30/30. I slink back outside expecting a big raccoon or something. The dog starts growling in the meanest most baddest way ever. I take the clue and hit the flashlight and could see the outline of 2-3 people through the slats in the fence. They notice the light and one looks over. All I see is a masked face. I chamber one round and immediately hear running. I open the gate by the garage door and I am face to face with a 20-something urban ghetto youth. One hand has a pair of bolt cutters, the other a screwdriver. Luckily I had the rifle up and he dropped everything and took off. Police showed up later and with their help they find 2 of the guys and charged them with multiple counts of possession of burglary tools and some other charges. If it wasn't for that dog, things could have turned out very differently than how it did. Well, where I live is part of what's called the Bridgewater Triangle. Many believe in the crap that happens, many don't. There are plenty of hot spots which runs between 200 square miles. There is a very common claim that if you stand long enough in front of the marshes in the swamp, you'll catch quick glances of deceased loved ones brushing between the waving marsh at night. Most of the people I know, even the ones that normally have slim to no fear, refuse to go. So anyway, personal story. Where I live was built over an old farm. I live in wetlands myself, which also so happens to be the exact location of one of the bloodiest battles during King Philip's War in 1675. If you travel far enough into my woods there are some awfully strange structures back there. They're made of cement so they aren't from KPW, but I honestly couldn't tell you what they're from. There's a huge cement building that's 2 stories high where the floors and roof have caved in. But there's a huge faded medical cross painted on the side. There also used to be a 1-room schoolhouse, but it collapsed about 7 years ago from heavy snowfall and structure damage. Some other crazy crap is there too. So there was one night, my first experience was within the first 3 months of our house being built. Coyotes and foxes would circle the houses on my cul-de-sac so I couldn't play outside much. We're very isolated and really deep into the woods. My house is really long, so the basement is huge. My dad let my sister and I rollerblade and scooter down there and use chalk on the floor until the animals started to leave the area alone. One night I went down and got my skates on and yelled to my sister upstairs to hurry up. I was sitting on the floor putting my skate on when I heard knocking on the wall, in my basement, through cement, underground. Now this wasn't any sound of the house settling or anything, it was knocking in a specific pattern. First really loudly, then extremely faint over and over, kind of like boom, boom 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 boom. There were no pipes, nothing of that sort, so I just sat there scowling in a confused manner when I suddenly started hearing what sounded like a baby crying through the wall. My eyes started watering and I tried running, but I had one skate on already and I fell. Then for just a few seconds more I could hear the baby crying and thumping through the cement until I panicked and screamed for my dad up the stairs. Was definitely done with hanging out down there until I had my basement finished about 5 years after. I have plenty of other stories, but this will probably not even be read. Post your stories on our Noleper share. We love stuff like this. Story 1. My sophomore year of college and lived in a house with 5 guys, but I was the only one in town with a job for the summer. Everyone else went back home, so I was living there by myself. One night during a really bad heat wave, I decided to sleep downstairs on the couch cause it was too dang hot upstairs in my bedroom, and I left the sliding glass door open with just our locking screen door closed for ventilation. I awoke the next morning to a man-sized hole cut in the screen door and our TV, Xbox, and PlayStation 2 that I was literally sleeping 5 featuring from missing, never to be seen again. Creepiest morning of my life, but I am glad I didn't wake up during the theft. That would have been terrifying and potentially deadly. Which leads me to the next story. Story 2. I grew up in an area with copious amounts of hiking and backpacking, and it was something that I regularly partook in. One night when me and buddy of mine were out in the mountains camping, after we had gone to sleep I woke up to the sound of tearing fabric. I had no freaking clue what I was hearing, so I woke up my buddy sleeping next to me and whispered to him, "What the frick is that?" Just as he was about to respond, a giant combat knife pierces the inner wall of our tent, cutting a sizable hole, and we both lose our crap. Then a hand reaches in, grabs my bag and pulls it from the tent, off in the dark abyss of the forest night. We spent the rest of the night up in an adjacent tree with our knives clutched in our hands, waiting to see if he would return. He never did. I never felt like I was going to die more than that point in my life. The mountains outside of town were, as I later found out, the home of a reasonable amount of people who no longer wanted to be a part of society, many people who had trouble re-assimilating after going to war and such. The second one wasn't a Home Alone story, but still applicable I think. Had the whole house to myself, and went to the downstairs bathroom. I had been using the upstairs one all day. The toilet seat was warm. I am deathly scared of aliens. One night, I've decided I will face my fears. I've started watching some semi-documental movie about alien abductions. There was this scene when some guy says that aliens often disable electricity to get people helpless at night. As this scene was playing, some creepy aliens being shown disabling lights. There was electrical failure in my house. Lights went off and a light bulb in my room exploded. I jumped into bed, hidden under the blanket. I then pressed my fingers hard to my ears so I couldn't hear anything. I've been laying like that for about 2 hours, tensing every muscle in my body. Frick that crap. TLDR. Aliens. My boyfriend and I lived in a small house on a quiet neighborhood street. It had a lot of windows and all the doors, of which there were three friggin' entrances all on one floor to get into a 1,000 square foot house. Had glass panels from top to bottom. We hadn't been living there very long. One evening I was home alone, as my BF was at band practice, and I was in the shower after a dance class when I heard the front door handle jiggling. I figured it was my BF getting home from practice and thought nothing of it. A moment later my phone went off. I got that panicky heart palpitating feeling because, really, no one but my BF would be texting me right then. So, shower still running. I reach out over to the sink and look at my phone. A new message from BF. Hey babe, gonna be home late, getting beers with the guys after practice. I'm having a holy crap moment. So, here is what I do, which for some reason seemed reasonable at the time. I decide that if someone is in my house I don't want them to know that I know that they are in my house. So I rinse off right quick and sneak out of the shower, leaving the water running. I get dressed and grabbed a metal shower curtain rod that had been on top of the dryer. I sneak open the door, tiptoe down the hall, look around. Nothing. All doors locked up tight, nothing roaming around. Felt a little silly of course. Went back and shut off the water. About an hour later I am sitting on the couch watching TV when all of a sudden our cat charges across the living room and claws frantically at one of the door windows. I jumped halfway up the wall, then looked outside. There was another cat out there taunting her. Turns out it had been her the whole time. TLDR. In the shower mistook cat clawing at door as someone entering the house when I was home alone. Not letting someone know you know they're there is very smart. Once was downstairs gaming, heard a massive thump upstairs. One of the loudest sounds I'd ever heard in that house. That wasn't somebody playing music. Sounded distinctly like something weighing about 200 pounds falling on the floor off a table, or a person keeling over. Went upstairs, could find zero discernible cause for the noise despite a comprehensive investigation. I got progressively more and more creeped out, and eventually just freaked and went to a friend's house. I figured one of my parents or brothers would find something out of place. Never did. Your house was probably settling. I've experienced it a few times where it feels like the whole house rumbles and there is a loud noise for just a split second. I was home alone and it was in the middle of summer, so I had a couple of the windows upstairs open. After a couple hours of playing Call of Duty 4, I go to my room. I hear this buzzing sound, but I assume it's still my ears ringing from my headset. I lift up my covers and slide my leg in, and I feel something. Something is crawling on my legs. I jump the frick out of my bed and just fricking run downstairs. I turn on every single light as I head back upstairs after calming down. I open the door to my room, and I see junibugs everywhere, all over the walls, climbing on my headboard, and, you guessed it, under my blankets. I don't know how the heck they decided that underneath my blankets was a good place to rest, but they picked it. So that night I shut all the windows but mine, closed my door, and slept downstairs. TLDR. Frick junibugs. I am glad you experienced my biggest fear. At about 1 AM, after a late night playing video games, my dog starts going nuts, really balls out crazy, and this is a very timid, quiet dog. He runs up and down the hall, Looks very scared, eyes wide and trying to look everywhere at once. I'm out in the country, so I figured he heard a raccoon or possum on the roof. So I go outside to check it out. Another dog, who I have since adopted, sleeps under my truck out back. She was not there. This was very unusual for her. She stayed with that truck 100% of the time unless I drove away at 60 miles per hour. So for her to not be in the yard at 1 AM worried me. Concerned at that point that she had been hit by a car or something equally disastrous and my other dog had heard noises from that. I start looking for her, shining my mag light around, calling her name, whistling, nothing. I go back inside, eventually fall asleep. The next morning, the sheriff is at the house next to mine, about 300 yards away. The place is ransacked like in the movies. Bookcases overturned, drawers pulled out, mattresses flipped up. They stole just about everything that they could, and some of the stuff, generator, compressor, would require at least 2 people to move. I could be wrong, but I'm convinced that the thieves sent a scout to my house that night, and that my activity in looking for the dog scared them off before they could load up the blanket bundle. There had been some odd noises at my window even before the dog went nuts, but I'm in the country and attributed at the time it to giant bugs, which are not unheard of out here. The outside dog earned a permanent place inside the house that night, and they both got huge beef knuckle bones, even if they didn't know what for. Burglary. To make matters worse, all they stole was a table fan and my favorite trousers. Joke's on them. You only had that fan because those favorite trousers made you hot. I had the flu. I had taken Theraflu and gone to bed, but a persistent door knocking woke me up around 2 AM. I groggily woke up, looked around, and noticed headlights from a large car that was idling outside. I started to freak out. I thought if I just ignored the knocking they'd go away. They didn't. Probably 5 minutes passed with intermittent knocking and the idling car with the headlights outside. No voices. I got up and went to my front door, realizing in horror that I hadn't locked it. Whoever these late night door knocking people were, they could just turn the handle and walk in if they wanted. My flu-addled brain whirred and clicked, trying to think of how to deal with this properly. I don't have a peephole on my door. I could start to lock the door, but whoever it was would surely hear that and would know I was there, and that was bad. Flu logic. I finally settled on grabbing a foot-long fantasy dagger, shut up, leaning up against the door, and growling, "Who's there?" trying not to sound stuffed up. Turns out it was a pack of terrified women. My uncle's family, who lived nearby, had gone on vacation. Their cousins, no relation to me, were staying in an RV at my uncle's place for a reason I don't recall. Their family is the mom and like 5 daughters. Friendly bunch, but hardcore devout Catholics. So no, the story does not go in that direction. They were convinced there was a stalker outside their RV, so they drove over to my place and asked if I would stay over at my uncle's because they'd feel safer knowing there was a man around. I ended up staying at my uncle's for a week until everyone returned from vacation. On the upside, he has a giant projector TV, but the flu still sucked. And then you had 6 women to take care of you as well. I was only 15 and babysitting in a neighbor's house. Suddenly I hear this noise in the hall. I go out and the front door is wide open. I'm freaking out, thinking someone has just broken in. I close the door and have a quick look around, but there's no one there. When the neighbor gets home, I tell him about what happened. He just says, "Oh yeah, the door blows open all the time." Would have been fantastic info to know up front. There was a vacant lot behind a parking lot across the street from my house. Me and the stupid neighbor kid were throwing rocks at it when a hobo came out and yelled at us, so we ran inside, scared. That night, most of the family was out of town, just me and my dad. I slept in my brother's bed whose window was right next to the front door. That night the hobo came and knocked on my window. Bricks had never been crap so hard. Go on. After a night of fun, my now girlfriend left around 2 AM. After walking her to the door, I promptly collapsed on the couch and fell asleep. I wake up to a knocking on the door. It was pretty clearly a knock. My cat, who was sleeping on the floor at the time, woke up and looked at the door like someone was there. Glancing at the clock, it's about 2:30, so I think maybe my girl left something. Get up, glance out the peephole, and I can see the outline of what looks like a female face with long hair. I didn't have the porch light on so I couldn't make out any details. Open the door but there's no one around and it's dead quiet. I live on the top floor and would hear if anyone was running down the stairs. I even went out and looked around to see if anyone was hiding. Nothing. Didn't get much sleep after that. You let it in. It was the summer of '95 and I was home alone at my parents' house playing Doom with a best friend that lived down the street. We were playing a large map where sometimes we could go for 5-10 minutes until getting into a firefight. As I'm playing, I hear the sound of the pink demon things coming from the basement. I stop playing and immediately take off my headphones and think it was just the game with ultra realistic sounding reverb effects. Then, I hear it again. It's the unmistakable grunting and the sound is coming out of the AC air vent in my room, which means it's coming from somewhere in the house. Terrified, I slowly go in my closet and get an aluminum baseball bat and start walking out of my room. My parents had a fairly large house, 5-bedroom, 3 levels, so I have no idea where the frick these noises are coming from. Then I hear a scream from the basement. It was a blood-curdling scream, the kind of scream someone makes when the last bit of life is leaving them. I completely freak out and grab the phone. There's no dial tone. Suddenly, all the power in the house is cut and I'm whimpering like a French schoolgirl in the 1st Street grade. I feel my way back to my room and get a flashlight while I hear the sound of an animal ripping the flesh off of someone. It's coming from the basement. I grab the flashlight and head down to the 1st level and the sounds are louder now. There is more screaming coming from the basement. As I open the basement door, I shine the flashlight down the steps and see a skull floating in midair. I just about pass out and start screaming. I run back up the 2 steps I went down but trip. I then feel 2 hands grab my ankles and start pulling me. I start having seizures from fear. I turn around and it's my best friend laughing at me. He had left his house, taken a fake human skull that he had stolen from biology class and tied it so it appeared to be floating. He had also brought over his boombox and started playing sounds from Doom and other miscellaneous, scary crap. He planned it out so that he would unplug the main phone line downstairs in the basement and he killed the power to the breaker. To this day, I still hate him a little inside. I am not proud of this. When I was about 10 I was at home with my younger sister and brother, 8 and 6. There were strict instructions that none of us were supposed to go outside at all. Well, I'm upstairs and the power goes out. I go to the top of the stairs and yell to my siblings to make sure they're okay. Neither of them answer but the door to the garage keeps opening and shutting. So I think that someone has actually broken into our house and kidnapped my brother and sister. I call my mom and she tells me to go downstairs to check on them. Frick that, I was way too scared and my mom is screaming at me to go check and I'm yelling to them but they aren't responding and the door just keeps opening and closing. Turns out they were just playing a game and everything was totally fine and there wasn't an axe murder in the house. I learned that day that I am a bad sister who couldn't even save her siblings from danger. TLDR. If we were alone together and someone broke in the house and tried to kidnap you, I wouldn't try to save you. To be fair, the first rule of rescue is don't become another victim. A 10-year-old is not much of a barrier to a determined kidnapper who is already in the house. I was probably 15 or so when I was home alone, on the computer, which was situated right next to a bay window overlooking our driveway. It was dark, and not being able to see into the darkness was starting to creep me out, so I went into the living room to watch TV. This continues for another half hour or so, when our dog, a huge giant schnauzer, perks up his ears and starts sniffing the air. This is a guard dog, so I know something's up. Then, there's a big whump upstairs. I figure something has just fallen from a shelf or something, or maybe the ancient air conditioning unit has broken. Nope. I went upstairs, turned every light on that I could, bringing the dog with me. He runs back downstairs as soon as I let go of his collar, which freaks me out a little. I proceed to our attic, which is generally untouched by my family, so there's dust piled on the floor and everything in there. I turn on the light, and see a little blue pocket knife on the floor in the dust, and one of the boxes has been moved, as I observed from the dust. Freaked out for real, about to pee my pants or throw up, I don't bother to shut the door or turn the lights off, run downstairs, and hyperventilate for a while on the couch. I reason that nobody could be in the house because I didn't hear anybody come in, and the dog must have heard deer outside, as often happens. Freaked out for the rest of the night, Slept with all the lights on. Never found out what it was that fell. TLDR. Dog is aware of something that I am not. Something huge falls in the attic. Dust tracks are found. Freaking out ensues. My bet is on raccoons. Creepy little bastards. They have hands and use tools. Not paws. Hands. Why do I suddenly feel like there is a murderous clown standing in my hallway now? Because there is. I was falling asleep in bed, right at the edge of sleep, when I hear something moving the shrubberies near my bedroom window. I figure it's the neighbor's cat or something, and try to get back to sleep. Once again, just as the dreams start flooding in, I hear it again, very distinctly. I decide to investigate, armed with a flashlight and my very best boxers. I thoroughly search my very tiny backyard for upwards of 10 minutes. Nothing turns up. I give up, head back inside, locking the door behind me, of course, and just as I round the corner to my bedroom, I hear a scratching at the window above my bed. At this point I figure, frick it, if the backyard chupacabra is going to eat me, I'm too tired to care. Nothing else came of it, but there were a lot of dead and dismembered birds in the neighborhood. The less imaginative me chalks it up to a very skilled cat. Other option, chupacabra named Charles that lives on the roof. TLDR. Backyard chupacabra visit. I wasn't totally alone when this happened, but it was terrifying at the time, and more so in retrospect. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my family lived in a wealthy neighborhood in Nashville, TN. We had a gardener and a couple of live-in maids. It was pretty sweet. My parents were attending some of charity event, and my little brother and I were at home. One of the maids, Joanne, was watching us until our parents returned. I had been asleep for some time when I woke to what I believed was a circus taking place in my yard. There were impossibly bright lights hovering in the air and voices booming over loudspeakers, though I couldn't discern what was being said. Joanne rushed into my room with my little brother on her hip, half asleep and beginning to wail. She took us to the front door where we were met by my parents and a bunch of FBI agents. I didn't understand what was happening at the time, but it turns out our gardener's entire family was involved in organized crime, and his family and several other gardeners' maids in the neighborhood had been planning to kidnap all of the children in the neighborhood for ransoms. They had alarm codes, blueprints, a small cache of firearms and handcuffs. Someone got cold feet and called the cops. The FBI was brought in and let the plan go right up to the last minute. The circus lights were helicopter spotlights and the voices over loudspeaker were saying, "Stop, this is the FBI, you are under arrest." That's way more terrifying than any ghost or demon. This happened to a family friend, young newlywed couple. Husband comes from money, so they have a nice house and plenty of nice things in it. Wife came from parents who were actively involved in their church's outreach services and who would frequently open their home to various down on their luck people, inviting them to come stay with them temporarily. In the better safe than sorry vein, her parents had installed a deadbolt on her childhood bedroom door, and thus, the wife had grown up with the habit of locking her bedroom door before going to sleep every night. Now married and living with her husband, the wife still locks her bedroom door every night, mostly out of habit. Husband goes on a business trip. Wife is home alone with their recently adopted German Shepherd puppy, more like an older teenage dog than an actual puppy, and who is not allowed to sleep in the master bedroom. Wife wakes up around 5 AM and knows the dog will need to be let out soon, so she gets up and lets the dog out to do his business. Afterward, she heads back to bed and randomly decides to bring the dog back into her bedroom with her, thinking, why not? Husband's not home. The dog can keep her company. It'll only be a couple more hours, etc. She locks the bedroom door and climbs back in bed to go back to sleep. The dog settles down on the floor next to the bed. Shortly after falling back asleep, she wakes up to the simultaneous sounds of the dog growling and two male voices outside her bedroom door. The bedroom door handle jiggles. One of the voices says, "I thought you said the husband wasn't home." Door handle jiggles again. Dog starts barking, and voice says, "That doesn't sound like a puppy to me." Other voice says, "Don't worry about it. Trust me." Terrified wife promptly grabs her phone and dials 911. While on the phone with them, the men run away, presumably having heard her on the phone. Police arrive, search the house and the neighborhood, Find nothing but her house's open door with no signs of forced entry. Turns out the wife had recently lost her backpack, or it had been stolen, not sure which, at the community college she attends. Said backpack had contained 1. House keys, and 2. A day planner journal which detailed pretty much everything about her life, including the dates of her husband's business trip and the recent acquisition of their puppy. Creepiest part about it was that the intruders had not touched or stolen a single item in the house, and there were plenty of things worth stealing. They were there for her. It was about 3 or 4 in the morning and I forgot to bring the garbage down earlier, so I decided to bring it down before I went to sleep. I live in a condo, so instead of putting garbage recycling outside, there's a room where the people in the condo leave all that stuff, and a janitor takes care of it, but it's located in the underground parking area. The underground parking is pretty freaking creepy to begin with. As I was bringing the garbage down, I heard some rustling near one of the pillars and I freaked the frick out, so I kept moving quickly to throw the garbage out. I couldn't tell what the sound was until I walked a bit more. Then I saw 2 guys I've never seen before sitting next to one of the pillars. One of them was doing H or some kind of drug with a needle and the other guy was sitting next to him. I caught their attention and one of them just stared at me with this freaking insane dead-eyed zombie look. I got the frick out real quick and called the cops. By the time the cops got there they were gone without leaving anything behind. I live in a pretty good neighborhood. I had no idea how they broke into the garage. I've been creeped out since. When I was maybe 12 or so, I had a loft bed. It was summer, and as usual I had the window open. While trying to fall asleep, I hear this dragging sound, like the sound of something being dragged across the carpet. Being a fairly logical person, I go through all the possible options of what it could be. When my mind exhausted all the logical possibilities, I started freaking the frick out, thinking it must be some alien creature dragging its creepy body across the floor. I yelled for my dad to come in because I was so scared. Turns out, it was the blinds rubbing against the wooden window frame, caused by a slight breeze, and then I felt like a giant pea. I hear this dragging sound, like the sound of something being dragged. Very descriptive, in a descriptive way, : After doing some cleaning at the house of my late uncle, I was heading to the front door to leave and for some reason I said out loud goodbye uncle's name. Suddenly the radio in the front entryway turns on and starts playing a song from some random radio station. Freaked me the frick out. When I was 11 years old, home babysitting my 7-year-old sister, 2 drunk sounding guys starting banging on the front door, calling for Mark and demanding to be let in. I kept explaining there was no Mark, but in response, the doorknob started jiggling wildly. Then they laughed all crazy loud and started throwing their body weight against the door. The door started shaking in its frame. We had a dog, who by this time was growling and barking like crazy, and after a minute, I heard one of them say, "That sounds like a mean dog in there." Then everything on the other side of the door got really quiet. All of a sudden, the dog perks up its ears and races out of the room away from me. I'm all, WTF? Did the dog just desert me? Seconds later, the dog goes berserk in the other room. I dash in, and my little sister's at the window, and it's open a little bit, and the dog has its muzzle pressed up against the opening, basically trying to maim, eat, and or kill the window frame. I freak the frick diddly out and scream at my sister to close the window and lock it, and she says in this crazy responsible you're being and butthole voice only 7-year-old siblings can master, "It's okay. They told me to open it. They're nice." I slam the window down, throw the lock, and go to the phone to call my parents, who promptly told me to hang the frick up and call 911. My sister refuses to hold my hand and dashes away. As I'm listening to 911 ring in my ear, I glance over and realize the porch sliding glass door is unlocked, and this was the 80s, so I'm on a corded phone, and I can't reach the door without letting go of the phone. And after that moment lasted forever and messed up my adrenal glands for the rest of childhood. 911 answered, sent the police, my dog barfed on the living room floor, and my parents came home. Never found out who Mark was. I walked in on my roommate once who was masturbating to old people pee. What has been seen cannot be unseen. One time the floor outside my room creaked a little bit. It was probably a murderer with a knife. I was home alone for a weekend in Toronto, and on the Saturday night I was woken up by police sirens. I look outside my window, and 2 cop cars are just pulling up to the neighbor's house. Curious, I throw on some clothes and a big jacket, it was winter, and go out to see what the commotion is about. Turns out, there were some crazed men, at least 3, that had tried to break into their walk-in basement, where the neighbor's teenage daughter had her bedroom. She claimed they had knives, and they had broken the glass on the basement door. The daughter was convinced that the men were intent on violence, not robbery, and they had fled only once her parents turned on all the lights. The police asked me some questions, but I hadn't seen anything. The other neighbors were equally useless. As far as I know, nothing ever came of it, and the police didn't have much in the way of descriptions or evidence. The next day, I found several sets of footprints in the snow on my deck, near the basement door, and one side of the house. Frick balls. Before I moved out of my parents' house, I would routinely stay up late and surf the internet or play games. The computer was in an office halfway down the hallway to all of our bedrooms. One night while staying up late, I decided to run out to the garage to grab a drink. We had a big box of soaps. I had grown quite comfortable walking around the house in the complete dark, but once I had my drink and started walking back down the hallway, I started to get that feeling that something is terribly wrong. I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. As I get closer to the office, I just know something is in there. I finally walk up to the door, turn to look in, and my body completely tenses up like I've been hit with a taser. I'm now seeing my body from the third person from the hallway. Then I woke up. It was a dream, but it was the most terrifying dream I've ever had, made even worse by the fact that I never did see what was in the office. Cut to later that week. I'm staying up late on my computer and I decide to go to the garage to get a drink. I walk through the dark house without a care in the world until I get to the garage, and then it hits me. I remember the dream. I immediately turn on the garage light and start thinking, oh god, oh man, oh god, oh man. I've decided that I'm going to turn on every light in the whole goddamned house before I get back to the office. I'm absolutely terrified. I finally build up enough courage to walk into the living room connected to the garage. I reach my hand around to find the light, flick it on, and I see a pale figure in a white robe standing at the end of the hallway. If there was anything in my bowels at the moment, it would have shot out of me at full force. For about a quarter of a second I was absolutely stricken with panic. It's probably the most scared I've ever been in my life. Turned out it was my mom. She had heard something and decided to come out and see what it was. I guess I wasn't technically alone in the house, but this was definitely the most creepy thing that's ever happened to me. Another time, sitting on the computer, actually alone in the house, I hear what sounds like someone watching the news in another room on the opposite end of the house. It's a strange sound where you can definitely hear what sounds like human voices played on a TV, but you can't make out anything they're specifically saying. I figured, oh hey, someone must be home, so I walked out to see who it was. Once I got there, the noise had stopped. I went back to my room and didn't hear anything else. I'm fairly certain it wasn't my computer, as it actually sounded like it was coming from across the house. Also, the previous owner's children died in a car accident and my sister has claimed to have seen children ghosts upstairs. My parents' house is hilarious. Also, the previous owner's children died in a car accident and my sister has claimed to have seen children ghosts upstairs. My parents' house is hilarious. I was too. Nothing funnier than dead children. Scariest thing that ever happened to me was while I was camping in New Mexico on a rock climbing trip. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.